This is the first video in a series that I'm maybe going to call Devil's Advocate, where I take strong opinions or hot takes, or just controversial issues, and look at both sides of them, challenge my own biases, and maybe make the whole situation make a lot more sense.
But they probably won't.
Probably not.
Today's hot take was provided some time ago by top commenter Resolif, who said that they thought it's okay to cut yourself permanently from someone you dislike, whether they're close family or someone you've barely interacted with but get bad vibes from, and anything in between. Which I'm going to simplify to, you can completely cut ties with anyone for any reason. And obviously this is something you can do, like it's allowed in most of the world. But just because you can doesn't mean you should. So the real question here is, should you? And there are some major differences here, so let's look at the different categories of maybe friends, or workplace acquaintances, and then family. Friends is a pretty easy one. When it comes to friends, I think most people would agree that you can cut ties with friends. They tend to come and go through different phases of life, and friends are pretty much by definition people that you choose to spend your time with. And sometimes it makes sense to spend that time with different people. Now there is an element of reciprocity that binds human relationships together. So this can feel bad or pretty awkward if it's someone that you've had a long friendship with, if they've done a lot for you, and you feel like you owe them.
I don't owe anybody anything.
But people change and they drift apart, and that's okay. Friendships are very much optional relationships. Just because someone was a great fit for a friend in the past doesn't mean that they're going to continue to be in the future, and that is part of growing and maturing. So if you don't want a friend around you anymore, then probably don't be their friend. That probably applies in the workplace even more so. If you have a horrible toxic workplace, then leave, please. But those two are the easy ones. Those are relatively uncontroversial. The big one is family. For a long time, like most of humanity, it was very socially unacceptable to be estranged from your family, and in many communities that is still true. But there is a growing movement of people who not only consider it socially acceptable, but often healthy. The most thorough research I could find on the topic was from 2022, and unfortunately, like a lot of research, it is very American biased, but it's what I have to work with. So in this case, it showed that 26% of Americans are estranged from at least one parent. And estrangement is defined as no contact or minimal contact with poor relationship quality. And that feels really high. Like a quarter of young adults have no contact with their parents? That feels huge! But this is tricky data. What is actually the case is that 26% of males and 27% of females have an estranged relationship with their father. Only about 6% were estranged from their mother. And that is a huge difference. The stat that you'll see if you Google this on all the news places and the headlines is 1/4 of Americans estranged from parents. But it's really mostly fathers. And guess how many people grew up with an absent father? Absent meaning one they never met or barely knew. Met once or twice. It's a quarter. 25% of kids never had the chance to not be estranged from their father. So, duh! Of course they're estranged. That made me feel a lot better about the stats. Because what this actually means is you have 5 or 6% of people who are estranged from their parents or who have willingly gone no contact, and that's still a lot of people, but way less than 26%. And there are subreddits and forums that are all about this. The most common reasons people go no contact are abuse, some sort of rejection, like if you come out to your parents and they are really not okay with that, or differences in ideology, particularly around religion or politics. An article in the New Yorker actually highlights the experience of one young woman named Amy who grew up in a very conservative evangelical household, and then as she got older and went to college, there became more and more tension between her and her family as she became more progressive, and her family became worried about the state of her soul. They were arguing about things like abortion, and Amy increasingly was feeling like her family were bigots and misogynists. Neither party could agree to disagree, and things escalated despite multiple attempts to heal the rift. And I think this scenario is where this issue gets really dicey, because I think most people would agree that in circumstances involving abuse or incredibly toxic situations, cutting family from your life is pretty reasonable. But is it worthwhile to cut your parents out of your life because you disagree on certain beliefs? And I've seen it go every direction, just anecdotally. While the stereotype is that of very conservative parents rejecting their children for their increasingly liberal or progressive lifestyle, I have also seen less traditional parents reject their children for joining a more traditional Christian, Jewish, or Islamic faith. People have cut ties over vaccines or climate views and probably anything else you can think of. And Amy's story in The New Yorker was more like this. It very clearly wasn't a case of abuse. It was a case of honest disagreement and sincere love and concern from both parties. But many advocates say that family shouldn't get any special exception or free pass. If there's a behavior or a belief that you don't want to have a part of your life, it doesn't matter if they're family. Just get them out of there. It's your life. And there's part of me that understands that. After all, you don't choose who you're born to. Sure, we share genetics, but why does that change anything? And I want to recognize that personally, I think I have a double standard here. But it feels like a reasonable double standard. If you are a parent that cuts ties with your children over an ideological dispute, I don't think that's okay. You brought a human into this world. You made the choice to have a child that gets to make their own decisions, and it is your job to be there for them, again, with the exception of abuse. Like, if your grown child keeps trying to stab you in the night, that's a different story. Estrangement feels like a great option there. But otherwise, even if you disagree with them and you don't support their decisions, it's still your job to be there and love them because you made that call. You chose that route. Kids cutting off their parents seems a lot more reasonable on the surface because they didn't make a choice there. But I generally believe that it is still usually bad. And data sort of supports this. Broadly speaking, people who have family relationships that are reasonably healthy and meaningful are happier and more fulfilled. Like, community and connection are really valuable to helping people thrive. And family tends to do that. Like, having a strong family culture is great, but usually if you're considering cutting ties, your family culture probably isn't great. And I have a theory here. It's very hard to prove because the numbers feel good at first. About 5 to 6% of people are estranged from their family, and about 6% of people experience some type of familial abuse. And that lines up really well, because abuse is the circumstance I think everyone can agree deserves estrangement. But I suspect that that 5 to 6% often isn't the same people. There are likely many of those abuse victims who don't cut ties even though they really should. And many of those who cut ties are in no way abused. And this is probably where my parent bias comes in, because I try so hard to be a good dad. But parenting is really challenging because nobody trains you for it, and every tiny person is different. And I don't know, because my kids are still really little, but I feel like I screw up a lot despite very good intentions. And if you haven't experienced it, it's really hard to explain how much you invest in these tiny people, like, before they can even talk. I'm in the stage where I have spent years investing everything I have in these little kids, and most of it they won't even remember. And you mess up so much even when you're giving it everything you've got, more than you even knew you had to give. And if my kids later decided to cut me out of their life because they felt that I had screwed up their existence so much that I was intolerable to be around, that would be pretty devastating. Like, I would still love them, but goodness, it would hurt, knowing that I'm trying so hard. And I know some quite decent parents that has happened to. But the good news is that the vast majority of these strained relationships do eventually reconcile and heal. The frustration caused by disagreement or resentment fades and becomes tempered by maturity. And that's good. That's comforting. that perhaps this big statistic that everyone's cutting everyone off is actually mostly overblown. So I guess back to the root question, can you cut anyone off for any reason you like? Yeah. Should you? Well, that's a great big it depends. But whatever you end up deciding in your situation, you should remember that your actions, while your own choice, do affect a lot of other people. And I do think that it's really valid to cut toxic people out of your life. But I also think we need to be careful that in our quest to remove toxic people, we don't become so callous that we become that exact same toxic and selfish person ourselves. But hey, maybe that's just me being the devil's advocate.